Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. So it's my great pleasure to welcome each and every one of you to today's webinar on emerging trends for effective resource mobilization. My name is Mary Joy Kimani, and I will be serving as your moderator this afternoon. We'll start with a word of prayer, and I want to invite Dr. Lucy Ogenyi to lead us through this. Welcome, Lucy.
Thank you, Mary. Let us pray together. Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity that you've given us to meet in this space at this time. We thank you because we have come from different places for one purpose, that you may equip us for the work that you have already put in our hands, oh God. We thank you for every member, for every participant who has come from the different countries within Africa and beyond. And Lord Jesus Christ, we desire that you may equip us, oh God, in this important aspect of emerging trades for effective resource mobilization. We thank you because of our facilitators. May you use the mighty Lord even to deliver this message to us. We thank you for the connections, and we pray that they shall all hold so that each one of us will be able to participate in the best way possible. We thank you, dear God, for each and every one of us, that we shall not leave this room the way we came, but we shall be equipped, we shall be better, we shall be knowledgeable in this area, and we shall also be able to put into practice that which you are teaching us today. So we give you praise, glory, and honor, because we have prayed in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.
Amen and amen. Thank you, Dr. Lucy. We will now have a brief introduction of AFCA by Pauline Kimani. Welcome, Pauline.
So welcome, everybody, and we are so excited to host you in this webinar today. My name is Pauline Kamau, but I'm born again this afternoon, and I love the Lord. Even for giving me this opportunity to serve with AFCA. And AFCA is, is an African Council of Accreditation and Accountability. That's what it stands for. It is a faith-based Pan-African institution that partners with Christ-centered organizations across Africa, like yours, all of you who are here. And our mandate is to enhance public trust, accountability, credibility, and institutional strengthening through accreditation, advisory, and advocacy. And this is in compliance with biblical standards. Today, we are here to uphold or to learn more on one of our standards, standard number 7, it's resource mobilization. And it's exciting to be able to learn on all this. And what we call them in AFCA is actually institutional strengthening or discipleship. That is what we are doing this afternoon. And we want to welcome all of you to learn together with us. We have, a lot of people, an array of people who are well versed in this area. So feel welcome. And let us hear what the Lord wants us to hear this afternoon. So you are most welcome, and may the Lord bless you even as we do this together. Thank you. Mary, back to you.
Thank you, Pauline. So today we are honored to have an excellent lineup of facilitators who bring diverse expertise and experience. We have set ample time to have a Q&A session, and we encourage you to post your questions on the chat so that we can have our facilitators answering us or responding to that at the end of when we open up for the Q&A session. We are hoping to have this opportunity to learn and to dialogue and to be inspired as we listen one after the other. So without further ado, let us begin this journey together as we uncover the emerging trends shaping the future of resource mobilization. Thank you for being here and welcome once again. To start us off, we have Reverend Kwame Rubadiri. He is the head of the Digital Ministry Department at CITAM and a resource mobilization consultant with over 25 years of experience in churches and academic institutions across the United States and Kenya. He became a born-again Christian in 1972, which transformed his life. Ordained in June 2003, Reverend Kwame has served as a conference speaker, Bible teacher, trainer in Christian communications, and the leadership development of communication practitioners. He's currently the chairperson of the board of AFCA and is passionate about equipping Christians to fulfill their call to ministry as diligent servant leaders, well-equipped to inspire followers to become great leaders themselves. Reverend Kwame has been married to Emmy for 41 years, and they have 2 adult daughters and a granddaughter, Neema. Reverend Rubadiri will focus on 3 topics. The first is integrating biblical principles in resource mobilization. 2, understanding the dynamics in changing times. And 3, fundraising, readiness, and identifying resource providers. Let's put our virtual hands together for Reverend Kwame Rubadiri. Welcome, Reverend Rubadiri.
Thank you so much, Mary Joy, and also many thanks to all of you participants who join us on this AFCA webinar. And I'm delighted to begin the conversation, and it is a conversation because we do expect you to participate in your Q&A sessions after this, and to share with us what some of your experiences are in the real world, so that we might be in a position to support each other. I'd like to begin by talking about how everything began, talking about creation. And this is going to be the basis for the first part of our session, session 1, which is the biblical foundation for resource mobilization. Now, we all agree and we all accept as believers that this world and everything in it was created by God. It was resourced by God, and God required that mankind then take responsibility to not only develop those resources, but even come up with new resources given everything that God had passed on to us. Now, I want to give a solid biblical foundation for this, and I'm going to do it in a very short period of time, in less than 10 minutes or so, because there is much more for us to unpack in this one session. But it is important for us to establish, number one, that God is the creator. God is the creator, and God has given us this amazing creation. He has given us all of the resources, as I said, around us, but he's also given us the creative ability as co-regents and as developers to work with him. In Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 to 28, which we commonly call the cultural mandate, and allow me to just read it for us, we get the basis for what God did and how we as resource mobilizers can help others recognize our responsibility as believers, as Christians, to be good and faithful givers. Now, Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 to 28 says the following. God said, "Let us make man in our image and in our likeness, so that they may rule over fish in the sea, birds in the air, over livestock, and over all the wild animals, over all the creatures that move along the ground." Verse 27. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. Verse 28 says, God blessed them and said to them, to the man and the woman, "Be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth, and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the air, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Now, there's a lot for us to unpack there, but we have a very limited time. So let me begin by simply establishing that God is giver, and he calls on us, having given us all of creation and the responsibility to watch over creation, the responsibility to dominate or to develop and produce something that will glorify him from the creation he has given to us. Now, again, because of the fall of man in Genesis chapter 3, this mandate we find difficult to fulfill, and unless we have and accept that we have the help of God, it is impossible for us to truly be effective resource mobilizers. Now, we don't have time to go through the other passages of scripture. All I will do is to simply highlight that God expects in Exodus chapter 25, he expects his people to give towards a specific goal, a specific purpose that he has established. And in this case, it is for the building of the tabernacle. And he gives instructions to Moses at the beginning of chapter 25, and he gives a reason for why he wants this gift, a willing heart gift from his people in verse 8. And that reason is so that not just that they build a structure, which is the tabernacle, but that they will have the experience or enjoy the experience of God dwelling amongst them. So at the end of the day, whatever we put together, whether it's a structure, whether it's a program, the idea is not just to have that structure or that program in place, but that God would infuse it in some way to reveal himself to his people. And of course, the rest of the book of Exodus goes through a very long, detailed instruction of blueprint as to the building of the tabernacle, its final dedication, and the presence of God resting in the tabernacle in chapter 40. When we jump to the New Testament, we see an example of, again, a request from God or a request through God's servants, but particularly Paul, Titus, and Timothy, and various others, to support a need, a physical, material need in Jerusalem. And chapters 8 and 9 of 2 Corinthians, Paul is making the case for the Corinthian church to follow suit with other churches in Achaia who have already set aside an amount to give in relief to the suffering that's taking place in Jerusalem. So resource mobilization starts with hearing from God. It begins with understanding that God is speaking and that God has a purpose, that God is looking for something to be done through his people for the creation and in the creation that he has already established. Secondly, resource mobilization requires a culture of willing response to God. Too many times we, and this is perhaps one of the reasons why many pastors find it difficult to talk about money or to talk about giving at any given time in their church, because the notion for many members is that the pastor or the leadership is trying to get money from us for either for their own benefit, even if it is to build a new facility. They're not so entirely sure or ready to part with their resources. And that's mainly because we have not taught our members, we have not taught the people of God about God's expectation. We have not taught them how to hear from God for themselves. We have not taught them to respond to God in an attitude or a heart of giving. And so it is this culture of a willing response to God. Later on, we'll talk about a culture of generosity that is essential for effective resource mobilization. And so resource mobilization is sustained by a compelling vision. It is sustained by people seeing what God sees and what he expects us to see as a result of our faithful support. And it is important, when I use the word compelling to qualify the word vision, it is that it is something that is crystal clear. It is something that is focused, and the individuals who are participating in the process of resource mobilization not only see clearly what needs to be done, but they see clearly what their role individually should be, and therefore making it easier to give. So the motivation to support or to give anything to a ministry or a mission must come from a compelling vision. As we read in Genesis chapter 1, God sets the vision for mankind. He says to them, be fruitful, multiply. Let's just go back to the previous screen. Sorry for that. He says, be fruitful and multiply, and allow all the skills, all the abilities, all the revelation and the training that is known to us as individuals to guide us into fulfilling the vision that God has already laid out for us. So this becomes a critical part of any leader, to provide that vision. And not just the general vision of the church, to reach mankind, to reach your community, to bring them to Christ, to disciple them, etc., but to give them a vision that speaks to some individual thing that they can actually do and that the mission or the ministry wants to focus upon. Let me quickly just highlight some of the reasons why people give. These are the top 3 reasons why people give, and top 3 reasons that resource mobilizers should be comfortable with and aware of in order for us to put together the kind of resource mobilization campaign and outreach that would be effective. Now, this comes from a number of surveys done many, many years ago, and what I've done is basically synthesize them. One of the biggest surveys done was done about 30 years ago by Gallup polling in the United States. In about 15 years ago or so, 2010, the Barna Group, also in the United States, also did a survey on what are the motivations for giving. The number 1 reason for giving is personal satisfaction. And this boils down not just to cash, but actually to chemistry or biochemistry, if you will. It's actually attached to our notion that we feel good, we inwardly feel good when we've done something practical or useful or helpful for another person or for a cause. Now, that in itself is very important. It's tied to the hormone dopamine, which is a mood regulator. It also has a lot to do with our emotional lives and the sense that we have. But it's a feel-good hormone, and so people feel good when they're doing something practical, helpful to others, especially if that individual cannot do something back for you. And this is why we give to people who beg on the side of the street. The second reason is to make a difference in someone's life. And this is tied much more, less to the chemistry, but much more to the purpose. To make a difference in someone's life is to tie ourselves to a specific purpose. And then the third, most effective reason why people give is that they are asked to give. James tells us that we have not because we ask not, but when we are asked to give by someone that we trust. These are the top 3 reasons. So let me go to part 2, which has to do with resource mobilization in changing times. Now, if we simply look at our economic reality, economic adjustments, because at the end of the day, a lot of our resources boil down to what's available financially and materially for us to draw upon. Again, it would have been nice to look at these one by one, and I'll do my best to touch on each and every one of these. The first is that we have a good sense of what the national and even international outlook with respect to our economies are like. For example, we've had in the last 2 years or so here in Kenya a very sort of difficult financial and economic experience. Our economy has grown. It hasn't grown as quickly as we would have liked, but the general feeling, the general sense amongst the population is that we are overextending ourselves. Yes, we have to pay off international debts and so forth, but to do so by taxing us as members of the populace seems a bit unfair, and it is certainly overwhelming for many people. So the cost of living going up, the ability to be able to make ends meet and to fulfill various needs, etc., is impacting us. That on top of big changes, like, for example, the ending of USAID's support and activity around the world, as took place earlier this year, which impacted not just programs, but people across the world, and particularly here in Africa and in Kenya, so to speak, where people who were working for such organizations that were dependent on the good support of a group like International Aid, and now looking to other donors, other supporters, looking into this, has had an impact. It's had an impact on our members who work for these organizations and their ability to either pay tithes or even give offering. So all of that must be taken into consideration. However, we move forward by faith. And if I had time, I would give examples of how to address this and address the reality of a low economic turn to impact, which has impacted people's lives, does not necessarily mean that you should not be engaging in resource mobilization. Many people, when it comes to resource mobilization, are simply looking at income. They're looking at what comes in at the end of every month, what has to go out in terms of obligations, payments, and just living, as opposed to considering the wider area of wealth. And many people give from income rather than necessarily giving from wealth. There are those who are in a particularly wealthy position who should be challenged to give from wealth, and there are ways in which we can address that, and hopefully we can during our Q&A. The other thing that we need to address in resource mobilization is how to handle pledges and the redemption of the same. I know that there are many churches, and certainly the churches that I have worked with, even the institutions I've worked with, there's the AIU, which is the African International University here in Kenya, which I worked with for 18 months to help make decisions, to help raise resources for a student center. That's a whole other story. But we mobilized not just the students, but mobilized alumni, mobilized partners, we mobilized others who are interested in education across Africa, etc., to make pledges. Now, those pledges can be given a time frame in which to be redeemed, but the process of redemption and the way in which that is handled is an extremely important part of effective and useful resource mobilization. Now, the methods of appeal, and I wish we'd had a bit more time to talk about how to use technology now, as opposed to how this was done 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I began the process of consulting in resource mobilization. Today, we are in a much better position in the use of technology, not only to make the appeal and to provide a sense of the scope of the need, but also to encourage people to use the same technology. I'll give some examples a bit later on, to encourage others to join them in the process of mobilizing resources. So that goes from anywhere from the use of social media to the use of good communication skills on channels like YouTube, Facebook, and others, developing videos that can be used as standalone devices to make appeal to those who would be in support of what we seek to do. And then, of course, utilizing technology again as effective methods for giving, because there are many different ways to give now. But let me say something very quickly about the whole notion of being high-tech, and that is finding ourselves going into down, I don't want to call it a rabbit hole, of AI and so forth in terms of resource mobilization, or being high touch. And I'll explain that in a few seconds. Now, if we ask ourselves the question, can AI, artificial intelligence, especially generative artificial intelligence, or even synthetic artificial intelligence, help with resource mobilization? The answer to that question is both yes and no. It depends entirely on how we, what type of AI we use and how we use that AI in particular. There is a growing suspicion globally around the world about whether something is real or fake. And if we don't use AI effectively, we can turn people off because they simply feel that we're using synthetic, made-up methods to try to encourage them to give or to provide support. So we need to be very, very aware of AI and how it can effectively be used in resource mobilization, and we need to know which AI. We also need to be absolutely clear about the importance of a leader's appeal directly. Now, of course, we can argue that in Paul's time or in Jesus' time, there was no technology to get in the way of making an appeal. When Paul made an appeal to the Macedonian churches or to the Corinthians, he did so as he did so in writing initially, but then he also did so in person. It is absolutely vital not only for the leader to be the one to make the appeal, but the leader to be the one to be seen as the one who makes the first gift or provides the first support towards this. That we're not doing, leaders do not make an appeal in vacuum, and this is the high touch approach. People want to see a personal connection for themselves. They want to see that their leaders are participating, their leaders are asking them directly to make a contribution towards this particular end. So let's look at the final portion of this. And again, I'm sorry for having to rush through the same, but these are important highlights. We want to consider now resource mobilization readiness and how to find givers. I'm using the word givers as opposed to the word donations, because a person who gives has a direct personal participation in the process, and they also take a direct personal interest in how those resources are used and what they will become. Now, I've just given a couple of examples here of projects that I've worked on and churches that I've worked with. This is, of course, Sitam Ngong in the middle, which is one of the larger resource mobilization campaigns that the church has done in the last now 15 years. And then to the left of the screen is an invitation to pledge and be a part of an ongoing resource mobilization campaign currently for all of the church. This was a poster which was developed by Sitam Woodley, and primarily for its own members, but of course it was used more broadly than that. On the right, a poster that has been developed and still in use, currently in use, by ICC Nairobi, which is putting up and almost finished what is known as the Dream Center. It is a facility for children's ministry as well as office space and other ministries as well. So how do we identify givers? Now, again, I would have preferred to do this in a proper sequence, one by one, but let me begin by simply saying that we must deal with the alignment. Why would people give to you and to your organization? Why would they respond to your ask? And the key thing is that they already have a motivation. If we think of donor organizations, for example, they want to give to a specific group of individuals. They want to give to a specific number of causes and purposes because they believe that's what maybe their initial benefactor would have preferred. So they want to give towards the education of children, for example, or they want to give towards higher education for theologians and pastors. It is important, if you're reaching out to a body, an organization, a donor organization, you know exactly what it is they want to give and why. What are they motivated to do, and why? What's the source of their motivation? Because if we can align with that and say, for example, to a group that gives towards children's education, we say to them, we are putting up a school in a community that has very little material to work with, or even little opportunity for the education of their children. This is who we are. This is what we do. We have a number of teachers in our church, a number of teachers in our organization, and they can provide the skill to do so. So we move forward by the how, which is the writing of a proposal. And this is looking at it specifically from the point of view of raising the resources from a donor agency, from a giving organization that has the resources to support and fully fund whatever it is that you have before them. We don't have the time to go into the great detail of how proposal. I think we need to do a separate seminar on the same, or a separate webinar on the same, but that's going to be a critical part of how to craft a proposal that meets not only and aligns with your donors, but also meets with your own key purpose and vision as an organization. Then the what, which is the budget impact. What will these funds do? What will they actually accomplish? What change will they produce in people's lives? And at the end of the day, that's what people are looking for. That's what donors, that's what givers, that's what our members in church are looking for. What will this actually do for us? When we finished the construction of Sitam Buruburu, which many of you may be aware of, it wasn't just to be able to accommodate more people, and to say that now we can provide for the large numbers of people who come from Eastlands into the Buruburu area every Sunday for church. But it was to answer the question, what kind of individuals, what kind of disciples do we want to raise? What kind of Christian makes a difference in Eastlands? What kind of church has an impact in the community that is predominantly domiciled in a place like Eastlands? Then, of course, the who. Every donor, and this also what comes back to church members, must know who's in charge, who's going to manage these resources, and who is going to be the point person. So you must build a strong team, a team of individuals that will give focus to this. It cannot simply be the pastor or the leader of the organization. It must be a group within the organization that will have responsibility for overseeing a resource mobilization campaign for however long that campaign is resulting. I said before that at the end of the day, resource mobilization is about people and their well-being and their benefit. And so we must ask ourselves the question, even as we identify a particular giver or a particular group of people to give, is what if they fail to give? What difference will it make? How will this impact the people we are seeking to help? What difference will it make to the community, to the future of this particular type or this particular group of individuals if we don't get these resources, if we don't get this money, if we don't finish this project, or we don't finish this cause and building? So in order to get to the compelling vision, which I talked about at the beginning, and I'm getting ready to close, we must get everyone to see the same future. And this is as simple as taking a photograph. I use this as an example, generally speaking, to show or to give us or to help us understand what I mean by compelling or the power of a vision. If you take a group picture, if we were to take a picture of everyone who participated in this webinar, when this webinar is over, we took a screenshot, if you will, and we shared it with everyone. The first thing that you and I would do is not to look for the moderator or to look for Pauline as the ED. We'll look for yourself, because the only the significance that this picture has to you is because you're in it. You see yourself in it. And this is important. People must see themselves in the vision, and they must see themselves as part of what the cause is going to result in. So I always give the encouragement, and I know that Reverend Julius from ICC Imara Daima is part of the chat, and he has gone through this. He understands how we worked on a capital stewardship campaign for 2 years, which resulted in the building of a leadership center in Imara Daima. And the same is true for CITAM, of course, ICC, and other places. I've worked with Mabuno and various other churches around Kenya, and especially in the United States as well. So I'd like to hand back to Mary Joy. Many thanks for your moderation and for your participation. I'm looking forward to your questions, looking forward to interacting together with you in the Q&A session after this. Back to you, moderator.
Thank you very much, Reverend Rubadiri. That was so informative. I think there almost everything needed to have more time for you to be able to engage in. I liked the quote that you had, the motivation to support or give anything to ministry or mission must come from a compelling vision. So I think one of the takeaways will be compelling vision is very key to be able to move the pockets of the people who need to give. I like the aspect that you said that personal satisfaction could be one of the reasons people gave, and I was trying to think through my own life and think when at the times when I had the dopamine effect that made me now decide to go to my pocket and give. And then the aspect of making a difference to somebody who cannot give back to you. And then trusting the person. I think that is very key for whoever is going to give. They need to trust whoever is asking for this money. I will be interested, and I'm sure many of us will be interested to know about how AI can be used to be able to get people to respond at a later time. Of course, it will be interesting to know how you can get the wealthy to part with their money. I think that might have been something that people picked also. And then, as I said, there are very many things, and the importance of a personal connection for the giver. And it's interesting. Some people have impacted us or connected with us through things like social media, like Facebook. And then those questions you asked, the why, the how, the what, the who, and the what if. What happens if we don't give money to this cause that you've asked us to give to? So thank you very much once again for very many things that you shared. I am going to encourage the participants to begin putting your questions so that at the end of it all, when it comes to the Q&A, we can be able to respond to the questions that you have raised. And I will also have my own questions in addition to that. If you guys do not, there are very many questions coming from this session that we've had. So thank you so much. Let's give our virtual hand clap to our speaker, Reverend Rubadiri. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, so we want to move on to our next facilitator. Our second facilitator is Susan Jambi Odongo, a social development specialist and thought leader dedicated to driving change in sub-Saharan Africa. As a leader of Lusoma Advisory Services, she helps institutions design effective strategies for addressing social changes. With over 18 years of experience in philanthropy, Susan has guided organizations in understanding nonprofit practices and fostering local giving in East Africa. Susan has focused on supporting nonprofit and philanthropy actors to make monitoring and evaluation a functional tool to demonstrate impact, but more importantly, support learning and growth in institutions. She has conducted extensive research on giving practices in East Africa and facilitated key events like the Grant Makers Summit in 2024 and the East African Philanthropy Conference. She's committed to equipping African organizations with the knowledge and tools necessary for impactful, locally led development. Susan will focus on 3 topics. 1, proposal development and donor engagement. 2, diversifying resource streams. And 3, impact reporting and compliance. Let's put our virtual hands together for Susan Jambi Odongo. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I do appreciate the opportunity. And thank you to AFCA for this opportunity to be able to engage with you. And it is indeed a pleasure to be among my fellow believers. I'm a believer, and I find it a privilege to be able to serve Christ within the market space, so to speak. And so thank you, Ben, for coming on board and hearing your expectations or getting to read your expectations. And even as we begin, I'll ask the team to support me with the presentation. And thank you, Reverend Badiri, for that amazing introduction and deep dive into the conversation on resource mobilization. And I'll just want to then go a bit deeper into what Reverend has already begun. And I'll just want to start with an image that really, I think based on what Reverend has been able to share, gives a picture of where we are at, especially as organizations that are really interested in demonstrating the possibility of social change that can happen, is that we find ourselves in a space where it's really volatile, it's really challenging. But as believers, we hold on to the word of God that says that we are anchored in Him. But beyond just being anchored with Him, I think when I look at this image, the conversation that comes to mind is in Ephesians, where Paul tells us about being well armored or fully armored. And specifically, I want to just touch on Ephesians 6:13, that basically says, and I'll just read it verbatim, therefore put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil or danger, as he said in the Amplified, comes, you will be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. And that is the idea, is that how well knowledgeable or how well skilled are we to be able to ensure that when we are bringing change to this world that is reflective of Christ, it is able to align even with the volatility that we see ourselves in. And one of the reasons I like this image is because it shows the image of the man who is actually just looking out. And you can see the wave looks like it's about to bite him in, but he's still on the lookout because he already knows he's armored and he's set. And so my desire is that at the end of this, we can be able to be armored and set to be able to really see how best we continue with our agenda as Christians, as faith-based organizations, to be able to see the social change we want to see in our communities, but overall in the world. And so in this process, we shall look at how do we make ourselves situational aware of the space we are in, aware of the trends that exist around resource mobilization, and actually take advantage of that to be able to advance our agenda. But beyond that also, how do we ensure that we are adaptable, that we're able to adapt even in situations where it looks like things are difficult? How do we ensure that we turn things for good in the space that we're working in? But beyond that also, how do we build ourselves to have that entrepreneurial mindset, a mindset that sees opportunity and sees how do you ensure that this opportunity benefits those who need it most? And finally, how do we take advantage of the connection that we have as Christians in the world, in the marketplace, but also recognizing that we have a connection with others that then we can be able to take advantage to help us to advance the work that we want to do. And so, in so doing, I want us to move to the next slide and just have a look at where does resource mobilization lie? And I want to look at it from the perspective of the fact that when you talk about resource mobilization, it ideally starts from the point of fundraising and the fact that there are resources that we want to bring in. But beyond bringing in resources, resource mobilization talks about the fact that we need to steward these resources and manage those relationships. And it's important for us to do that. Why? Because we believe that there is what we are doing lives beyond us. What we are doing is not just for the now, but it's for the future. And so it's very important for us then to think about how are we ensuring the well-being, not just of our organizations, but being able to address the needs that may come into the future without compromising the needs of the present. And that's what sustainability is. And so in our conversation, we really want to help us to think about, let's not just think about resource mobilization for now, but let's think about resource mobilization for long-term change. And we shall look at it in, I would say, 4 or 3 perspectives that Mary Joy has already mentioned, is that we want to look at it from the aspect of proposal development, look at it from the aspect of donor engagement or donor cultivation. And I want to say that when I talk about donors, I'm not just thinking of big, I'm thinking of, as Reverend said, givers who are coming on board. And then want to think about, are there alternative ways for us to really raise revenue for the work that we do? And then looking at how do we ensure that in our efforts of not just raising resources, we can be able to steward those resources effectively. So reporting and compliance, right? And so I want to start with the next slide, which is focusing on proposal and development. And I'll just look at the definition around it. And before we go to the definition, it's very important we start with the question of understanding the why. Why are you interested in raising resources, right? And anytime we start with proposal writing, we normally say as resource mobilization experts, we say that proposal writing is the last thing you do when you are looking at raising resources, right? And I know for some of you it's surprising because normally what do we do? The first thing we do is proposal writing. But ideally, it is actually the last thing we do. And we just want to share with you what are those dimensions that help you to understand why is it the last thing that you normally do. And this is where it is. You normally need to start with your why. What is a gap you're seeking to address? When you say you're looking out for resources, why are you raising resources? It's very important for you to have that clarity. But beyond that, it's also important for you to understand who you are and why others would feel that you're best suited for them to engage with you. And we normally call this your value proposition as a change agent. Of everyone, why you? And it's very important for you as an organization to understand what is your unique value proposition to the world, to the space as a change agent. And then you also need to be very clear. Why would you want partners or givers to be able to invest in the work that you do? What is the benefit of them partnering with you? But most importantly, is you need to start asking this question now rather than later. Is what makes your partnership viable? What is that thing that helps you to be compatible with one another? Now, when you're asking these questions, try to ask them early, because this is what is going to guide you when you are doing your proposal writing. And so on to the next slide, because we also want to recognize that when you're looking on proposal writing, there are two ways of doing it. Is that there is an aspect of writing proposals, but there's an aspect of writing concept notes. And I thought it would be important for us to recognize these two elements. Now, the starting point for this is to recognize that these two aspects are tools to support our resource mobilization efforts. They are not the key to resource mobilization or fundraising. Again, I'll keep reiterating. Why? Because they are not the reason why. Most funders or most donors or most givers will give because they believe in your idea. And I'll go back to what Reverend mentioned. It's about the fact that they trust you. It's about the fact that they have an interest in what you do. And so when you think about your proposal, think about it as a tool that really helps you to explain what it is you want to do, how you want to do it, how you wish to implement, and what it is you desire from the givers or the donors that are going to support you, right? And the reason why we say you need to look at these two elements, the concept and the proposal, is because sometimes there are those donors, and this we have seen especially among corporates or individual givers who may not be interested in a big or a long document. They just want something short that helps them to understand your ideas and helps them to see how well they can be able to engage. And then there are those who, once they see that concept, are able to say, give us something longer. Or there are those who see that concept and say, this is enough, and this is how we can be able to do it. And think of a concept as small as a poster, as Reverend has shared some of those, right? And when you think of a proposal, don't think about 50-page reports. Think about them as a 4-page document that just basically shares, this is a project, this is why we feel that this project will be able to bring the change. This is why we feel that it's important for you to come on board and engage with us. And this is why we feel that we can be able to deliver this project effectively, right? And out of that, you're able to say, what is the investment then you would require? And even when you think about this process, again, I'll remind us, resource mobilization is not just about raising money, it's about raising partnership. So even when you're talking about the investment required, don't just think about it in terms of finances, think about it also in terms of what is the technical expertise you might require, what are some of the maybe infrastructural needs that you may have, because you may be able to realize, and I like what Reverend has shared, is that in your searching out for these partners, you might discover there are those who may not necessarily give you financial support, but they are also able to give you non-financial support. And so it's important to make sure that these elements are fully captured as part of your investment, right? And so having looked at that then, and similarly, it would be great to go deeper into some of these elements, but I just wanted then to move to the next slide and focus on what are some of those aspects that we need to think about as key when we are doing a proposal development process. Picking up from what Reverend has shared is that it's very important to understand your giver. And so research and profiling your potential partner is very important. And it doesn't matter whether they are individual givers, whether they are corporates, whether they are small foundations, whether they are churches, you need to understand who it is you want to be able to partner with. Why? Because it helps you to see, are we of similar values? Are we aligned? How best would I be able to engage them? Right? And this is where you begin to see the list that Reverend has shared of looking out for givers and who givers are comes to apply. Now, it helps you to do that research because then you'll be able to align your needs to those of the partners, right? And I normally say it's a relationship where you're saying, these are my interests and these are the interests of my partner. So where is it that we have a shared understanding so that you can focus your proposal around that area? And so if you have a partner who, for instance, is interested in education, health, agriculture, and you are primarily focused on education, then you'd want to make sure that you're finding that convergent point on education. Do not focus on everything and anything. Make sure that you're being succinct, right? And then it's important to understand what is the type of proposal that they are interested in having from you. And this is the point where the research becomes very important. Are they a team of people, or is a given individual who's interested in understanding what impact is? Are they interested in the process? Are they interested in the motivation? So that then you're able to tweak your proposal to align to that. And this links a lot also to the language. What is the language they use? Now, if you're in the marketplace, you will realize that there's language that marketplace would be interested in learning. For instance, they'd be interested in learning, hearing a lot more around what is the social impact of social value that then their engagement will bring. And so it will be important for you to bring that out. While among believers, their interest would be, how are we ensuring that the gospel is able to have an outreach of X, or how is it going to reach out to a community in this area? And so you'd want to make sure that that comes out stronger. Why? Because remember, you're trying to connect to their interests and to their motivation for giving. But finally, and most importantly, you need to proofread. Now, when I say proofread, it's not just about checking whether the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. It's beyond that. It's going back to look at how well have I aligned to the interests of the giver? Have I been able to provide options for A, B, or C? Have I responded to the giver's interest? This is very important. And remember, as you do the proposal, it's not about you. It's about how are you responding to the interests of the giver so that they can be able to see the impact that you are both interested in achieving. All right? And so moving forward then, I would want to then just highlight what are some of the tops and tips you need to think about when you're looking at proposal development. Is that one, you need to make sure that it's not just about the quality of the project itself, it's also the presentation. How you present your concept or your proposal matters. Secondly, you need to really make sure that you're demonstrating your niche and innovation. Now, normally when we talk about niche and innovation, people go into technology and IT, but it's beyond that. For example, you may want to show, I worked with a partner who was able to demonstrate, as opposed to bringing in, they were working in the health sector, and as opposed to bringing in reporters to be able to document on health processes that were working or not working in health centers, they demonstrated that they were going to strengthen the capacities of the community around the health center to be the ones to actually do the reporting. And that is a form of innovation. Okay, so that's very important. 2, it's important to make a connection. I think we cannot overemphasize this, that connecting with the giver will really provide you a long way of not only tagging them to have interest in what you're doing, but it helps them to build trust in you, in seeing that you know what you want to be able to do as a change agent. But finally, also, it's about demonstrating value. How do you ensure that you're demonstrating value? But beyond that, I think I would want to give a critical tip. Most of the times when you do proposals, sometimes they are unsuccessful, and we just normally just let it go and say, okay, we tried. But I want to challenge you to look at this in a different perspective. 1, whenever you receive feedback of having not been successful, show gratitude. It is so important because it demonstrates your interest to really continue engaging. I had a partner who had been able to put in proposals. They did put 2 proposals to a specific donor. And every time they put in for those 2 times, they didn't get the position, but they always did share. Thank you very much for considering our proposal. Please do engage with us on these social media platforms. Let us know if you'd like to get our newsletter, which we produce every month. And what happened is one of the partners who had been identified dropped out of that opportunity. And this partner, who had been rejected twice, was actually called in to be able to take up that position. And so showing gratitude does have its impact. But most importantly, as a team, reflect, review, and document your learnings. Every process has a learning. So how best can we be able to take that up and to be able to document? Okay. So I'll just pause there on proposal development. There's a lot and there's a way we can go deep into it, but I just wanted to highlight some key elements that I think are very important. And I wanted to transition into donor engagement. And I'll ask the team to just move to the next slide on donor engagement. And I think it's important for us to just have an understanding of what do we mean by donor engagement. And when you talk about donor engagement, it's ideally looking at how do you establish methods, activities that your organizations can do to be able to interact better with the potential partners that you're thinking of engaging, so that then your activities and your engagement as a nonprofit are successful. And I want to mention here that it doesn't focus on the methods and activities. It's also a mindset change. So remember when I started, I talked about an entrepreneurial mindset. I talked about situational awareness. All these elements really are about what is the mindset we have when engaging donors, and what mindset can we be able to enable the giver to have when they are engaging with us. And so it's very important, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to have partners who trust you and are able to walk with you on your journey of promoting social change, right? And so that's why it's important for us to think about how are we engaging donors. And I would like to say that this is not a short-term process. It takes time, and it is a process that needs to be initiated even before you start thinking of proposal writing. And even when you do get an opportunity to engage with some of these givers and they do give, we normally say do not end with the giving. Keep them engaged in that process. And even when it ends, we want you to ensure that you're still engaging them, because you may never know that even in the future, they can be able to come back and give again. Okay, so I'm just going to share some techniques that you could consider as you think about engaging donors. And I want you to think about it in the long-term perspective, not just before you give a proposal, but during and post. And one of the things I think I want to just highlight is that you always have to be genuine and you have to be personal. And I think Reverend Rubadiri has really emphasized on the aspect of this. Authenticity is key. And it's very important for us to be authentic. Why? Because it really helps to demonstrate where your interests are And it helps even the giver to begin to have a genuine understanding of what it is you really want to have. And the connection of values begin to have its place, right? So it means that you also have to have an interest in the donors individually. Don't just look at them as a money bag. Don't just look at them as a giver. Look at them as a person interested in promoting change the same way you are promoting change. This helps you to have a better connection. But beyond that, it's important to have a structure that helps you to continuously ensure that you're engaging your givers. Do you have a database that supports you so that you're able to also put that profile? Remember, we talked about profiling. So we need you to put that profile somewhere, right? It's to enable you to see how to connect effectively with your donors. And it helps you to also understand, how do I communicate and engage them? And so a database is very, very important because it helps you to understand, if I am using a certain approach of engagement, which groups of donors within my database do I engage with? Right? And so it's very critical. What kind of information are they interested in hearing? Because that will help you to be more effective in your work. All right? So authenticity is key, but beyond that, having a database is also critical. Next slide. The other aspect comes to the mode of communication, how you engage them. And as Rev has clearly said, is that it's very important that, yes, we want to adapt technology and new ways of giving, but personal touch is very critical and very important. And so it's important to also just reach out to your different partners at different points. So one of my clients, one of the things that they normally do is they actually have used a database, and out of the database, they have developed a schedule of actually getting in touch with potential donors and those who are currently giving to their work. And what they do, they've actually scheduled them on a monthly basis. So on every month, they have a set of donors that they engage. So that by the end of the year, they have made sure they have at least had one touch with different donors within their database, right? And some of these are local partners and some of them are external, international. And so what they do is, for local partners, they invite them to come for their activities, even if it's not an activity that they're supporting. It's come, we have this activity, come and see what we are doing. Come and interact with the community we are working with. And then for the international ones, they're able to share some photos. They do have a 1-hour call with them, just sharing what they're up to, what is an update, and how they can be able to support the givers as well. And that has helped them to really be able to cultivate that partnership in the long term. Another way of doing it is host a meeting or host a group of donors together. In some of the development spaces, we call this the donor roundtable, where you call them together and are able to share the work that you're doing, how you'd want to engage them, and what opportunities for partnership exist with your organization. And I normally tell organizations, do not look at it as a begging venture. Look at it as an opportunity to give others to get into partnership with you. And so a mindset of recognizing that you're giving people to invest in change is the way you need to go forward with this, right? And then finally, to the next slide, is that it's important for you to also recognize, we can move to the next slide. It's important to also look at, remember what we said, that different partners would like to be engaged differently. Think about your engagements in a creative manner. So think about short messages of thank you, of appreciation. If your partner is in a country where they're having an event or a national holiday, just send them a message. They appreciate this small kind of interactions and engagements. Send them a video immediately after an activity saying, this is what we've been able to do with the resources that you've given us, and here is a picture of impact. You do not have to wait until you have, a long report or when the season has ended. Take advantage of the moments here and now. It really helps to draw them closer. But beyond that also, keep engaging by reminding that we have been able to get X amount of resources. We have been able to get X amount of volunteers. We still have 3 or 4 or 5 steps to go to help us to reach our vision and our goal, because that's very important. And then also consider peer-to-peer campaign. And I go back to what Reverend has shared, is that people give because they've been asked to give. And so take advantage of the network you have, the connection you have, and use that connection to be able to see how do you advance the work you're doing through them, so that then it creates an interest and encourages people to be able to give towards your work. Okay? So those are some of the techniques I think would want to think about, that when you're, and there's a whole 10-step process we could talk about in this, but I thought it would just good to highlight a few that would really help us to begin to think of what we already have that we can use. But beyond that also, it's how do we boost the existing engagements that we have to enable us to move forward, right? And so I'd want to transition then to looking at the diversifying resource streams, because we've talked about those aspects of giving, but now we want to think about, as organizations, how do we diversify our resource stream? And I've talked for a while, and I'd want to just take a pause here, and I want us to do a small poll where I want to hear from you. And I just want to hear from you, what kind of resource streams have you been able to undertake? And so I'll just ask the team to put up the poll. Thank you very much. And it's a multiple choice. It's anonymous as well, so we will not see your name. We just want to be able to see where people have been able to experience. So just using the gadget you have, I'll just give you a minute to be able to just share. Okay, great. So I see most of us have the experience of grants as a large proportion. I see membership. Sorry, not membership, asset building and event organizing as next, and then events comes close together with impact investments. And then we have social enterprise, and then finally we have crowdsourcing, whether in community or through digital spaces, and then we have consultancy services. All right, thank you. Thank you very much to the team, and thank you very much for participating in that poll. So it's great to see that there are those of us who are engaged in different ways of resourcing our work. And even as we begin, and I'll ask that we move to the next slide, again, it's very important for us to think about the why. Why are we doing resource mobilization? Because then when you think about why you're doing resource mobilization, it helps you to also think about who then should you engage on resource mobilization, which is very, very important. And so there are different ways of looking at it. You may be raising resources because you want to increase your income flows, where you want to be able to bring in more funds, more support for the work you do. Sometimes is that you already have a good flow of resources, but you want to strengthen your resource base. So remember, our volatile time in the sea is that you want to make sure that you are ensuring that you have put in place elements that can help you to address if there are any risks that may come or any challenges that may come. Or you want to enhance your sustainability, is that you recognize that the work you do is going to be for the long haul, and therefore you want to make sure that you're putting in place reliable and flexible resources that can ensure that you're not dependent on a few, but you have a base that enables you to continue having those resources for the long term. And so that's very critical. And so based on that, I just wanted to highlight then some of the resources or resource streams you'd want to consider. And I'm glad that some of you already have them. And so I'll ask the team to just move to the next slide. And there are various ways you can raise resources, right? And some of them I have highlighted in the poll, and I just want to highlight what do each mean. But even as I highlight what each means, I think it's important to recognize that what are some of the things that will help you to really understand these different resource streams and which ones apply to you. So one, you need to think about how you're registered as an institution. And this is where also compliance comes in. And also, what are the regulations of resource mobilization in your country? It's very important for you to understand those two aspects. So recently in Kenya, we have now put in place what we call the Public Benefit Organization Act that allows organizations to find alternative means of resourcing. Previously, when we had the NGO Coordination Act, it was not possible to do so. I know many faith-based organizations register themselves as societies or as companies limited by guarantee that has enabled them to find alternative ways. So it's very important to understand how are you registered? What does a regulation in your country allow you to do within that registration entity so that you can see which of these apply. Two, you need to think of your capability and your mission and your vision, because that's very important. We say that you have to be careful not to follow the money, because money follows ideas. So what ideas do you have to enable you to do effective work of social change? And what models will enable you to be able to deliver that work effectively? So it's very important for you to think about that. Three, think about your knowledge. What knowledge do you have to enable you to actually apply these models of resource streams? When you do that, it enables you then to come back and say, based on our capability, based on our compliance, then, and based on our mission and our vision, then we can be able to take up the following ways of raising resources or diversifying our resource streams, right? So most of us are well conversant with the grant, so I won't talk much about it. I will just say that we are currently trying to encourage organizations to move beyond just looking at grants. And grants is basically saying where you have someone giving you resources, and we are saying we need to look at how do we strengthen those, not just as donor recipient, but as partnerships that promote equal value to the table. What we have seen is sometimes there are times donors who give to organizations, and what has happened is over time, an organization loses its mission and vision and purpose because it ends up serving a donor. And so what we encourage organizations, if you still want to continue doing the grant approach, always take time to evaluate. What is the relationship like? Do you still feel that you are a value partner? And do you feel that the giver is still a value partner? Because that will be very important to ensure that your terms of relationship apply to both of you in a way that you continue having a good relationship. That's very key. Secondly is around consultancy services, where you say you have a certain expertise and you want to be able to charge a third party or another party with a fee to be able to support, or to be able to support them and they support you with some resources for the services that you're offering. And while this is a very good way of doing it, especially if you do trainings, if you have technical knowledge, it's a very good way of doing it. One of the things we say is you have to be very careful that you don't have mission drift. Because what happens that when you have mission drift, then it becomes a pursuit of money, as opposed to ensuring that your mission and vision is still being achieved. And so that's very important. Then there's asset building, where basically you have an asset, say an office or land or a technological service, that then you lease out at a price to be able to earn an income. And you've seen this with different faith-based organizations. Some of them have what we call charities. Some of them have resource centers, charity shops, resource centers. Some of them even have accommodation lodges that they then offer to be able to earn, right? And then I think one that we're very well conversant with is event organizing, where you have an event to be able to raise resources. And this one we have seen charity walks, dinners, collection boxes. These are some ways of being able to raise. And then there's a membership fees where you have members who are able to bring in resources and pay for certain benefits and are able to earn out of that. And the organization is able to earn out of that. That helps them to do certain activities. And then finally is what we call social finance, where we say you can either have a social enterprise, and in this case is that you are applying commercial strategies, but what you're doing is, as opposed to earning profit, you're maximizing that resource that comes in for the well-being of humans or the environment, okay? And so it's ensuring that that happens for the benefit of social good. And then there's impact investing, where you get either individuals, organizations, or companies to be able to put a substantial amount of money within your organization to be able to see how do you promote social impact for a certain financial return. And so these are different ways that then you can think about when it comes to resourcing. And then finally, I think the most critical part is I would want to just highlight around reporting and compliance. And so I'll ask the team to move to the next slide. And I think this is where stewardship for us is very critical. As we work as resource mobilizers, one of the things we've realized is we focus a lot more on impact and compliance once we have received the money. We don't think about it in terms of when we are resourcing or mobilizing for the resources. And so the conversation here is just to help you think about how do you take advantage of ensuring that your impact reporting does not just focus on when you have received, but it's also pre, during, and post, right? And so why is it important for us to track or monitor the resource mobilization? Is because it helps us to see what is the effort we are putting in and what is the performance of the work we are doing. And we say, for you to raise resources, you need resources. And sometimes you assume these resources. And so we make sure that then you are very able to have these resources in place for you to be effective. And so it's about ensuring that you are tracking how much resources are you putting into the resource mobilization process so that you know you're not overspending. Are you able to modify your strategies? Remember, we talked about donor cultivation, doing research, engaging donors. Is that an expense that you need to be able to manage so that then you are being very, not just being frugal with your resources, but also making sure that you're using your resources effectively. But also it helps you to demonstrate how you are committed as an organization to accountability, because that's very critical. But finally, you also as an organization needs to have that continuous learning process, saying that if we tried this resource mobilization way of raising resources and it doesn't work, what have we learned from it? If it is working, what are we doing well? And that's why it's important for us to be able to monitor our resources, okay? So I'll be sharing this slide, so I won't go into deep detail with the remaining elements. I'm quite cautious of the time. And maybe just to move next is just to highlight what do you want to report and what are some of the things you should need to consider to report. Is that one, think about tracking your efforts of fundraising. I think this is something I've already said. Is that we want you to be able to track what strategies are working, how effective they are, and who are they working with. Two, you need to track your costs. It's very important. Record all forms of expenses. And here I normally say both financial and non-financial. You have volunteers who are supporting you. They are putting in time. That is a resource. You have people who are advising you, your board, that is something you also need to cost so that you learn and see what is the value of what we are getting vis-a-vis what we are able to receive when we finally put out our proposal and our concepts. You also need to record the contributions and the grants or the income that you're getting, because it really helps to demonstrate your stewardship. And I think it's important to say, it's not just enough to just record, it's about timely recording. And then you also need to look at reporting, because you also want to do an analysis of what is your return in investment. And I would further say, what is your return on impact? Because that is very important. You also need to look at how do you ensure you are documenting your processes, because that will help you to learn, and it will help you to put in place a system that works for you. And so it's important to ensure that you are also documenting what has been successful, how was it successful, tell your stories, because this will help you when you are looking for other partners to come on board and support you. And then moving on to the next slide. It's important to also establish then what are your indicators of success? How will you know you're being successful in resource mobilization? Because this is a process that takes time. It is a process that will need you to invest the team to come on board. And so it's important to really put in place what are those markers that will help you to see that you're being successful. And you'll be able now to begin to see the fruit of your labor, right? So here I just highlighted some elements that can help you to think about some indicators of success. So what kind of partners you're getting on board? What kind of resources are you getting on board? What is the degree of impact you're having out there when you're doing your work vis-a-vis the resources you have come in? What are the kind of partnerships you've been able to build? Then how many of your partners are you retaining over time? Because that's very important to help you to see how effective are your processes, but also what are the new insights that you're able to get on board. So it's very important for you to think about some of these indicators, right? And I'm sorry, I'm going to give an information overload on this, because this is also very critical elements that you need to think about when you're reporting. So I'm just highlighting a few, and I believe the presentations will be shared with you to be able to look at it. And so that's just elements of reporting. Now let's look at elements of compliance, because as we said, we want you to be good stewards and effective stewards. And as Christians who are really seeking to dominate and promote Christian values and Christ in our different spaces, whether in the marketplace or whether within the communities, it's important for us to ensure that then we are promoting a way that allows us to be seen as accountable, but beyond that, to be effective stewards. And so I'll ask the team to move to the next slide. I think for this, I'll just highlight key elements that we need to think about. Is that when you are thinking of compliance, think of it in terms of, one, resource mobilization is not just about raising money, it's about strengthening partnerships. And so you need to be able to ensure that you have in place compliance elements that help you to assess your financial performance. But also you need to be able to assess your non-financial performance as well. What are those resources that have come in? Who has been able to support us? How much time has been spent in volunteering? Because that helps you to see how effective you have been in your resource mobilization and how well you've been able to steward even those who are coming on board to support your work on social change. Because remember, your interest is not just being the only change agent, is to create other change agents in your givers and in your supporters. Next slide, please. In addition to that, we need to think about how are we really strengthening the stakeholder base? And I say stakeholder base because, as I told you, your givers are not just interested in giving for the sake of it. They are interested in giving because they want to be able to fulfill either a desire or to be able to support the work that is going on around them based on those who have invited them to give. So you also need to be able to check how many people are getting on board. You want to be able to see how many of those are we retaining. You also want to be able to see how many of those givers have moved from being a one-time giver or just being a volunteer to bringing their family, their community, to being part of that. But beyond that also, you want to also assess how long is it taking for you to put in your proposal? And I say proposal lightly because, as I said, you can either be giving a concept or a proposal. So how long does it take for a proposal to go in and a giver to give you? Because these elements help you to ensure that even as you put in place a system, it enables you to be effective in not only managing the resources, but also seeing how to ensure that the giver is able to see that their returns and the benefits of their giving is in place. Okay. And so I want to end there with this quote and just say that sometimes when you think about resource mobilization, it can be overwhelming. And my encouragement to you is we don't expect you to change your destination overnight. But our hope and our desire is that through this process, you begin thinking about how do you begin the process of change with just the direction. Okay. And so with that, I will stop there. And I'll just say thank you very much for the opportunity. And I will share my details with the team just to say that this is the work we do as Lusoma to be able to support organizations. And so what we have given you is just a touch of the work that we do. And we really do want to appreciate that you have been able to come to receive this knowledge and information. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Susan, for that very insightful presentation. There is a lot to take home, and I think there's a lot of practical things that the participants will be able to take with them. I picked a number of things. We need to steward those resources, not just for now, but also for the future, without compromising the needs of now. And I think that's important because sometimes people are ready to give now, but they are worried if there's a change of leadership, can they still be sure their resources will be taken care of? And then I like the aspect of your value proposition as a change agent. Why are you best suited? Why is your organization the one that a donor will want to give? People are getting so many requests every day, so many proposals. What stands out about what you are asking money for or what you're proposing that will make a funder decide it is you and not the other person? And then I guess maybe people know this, but for me now, I learned a proposal is a tool to gain funding and the funders to gain confidence that you have the details required to succeed. That's important. You have the details to succeed because sometimes people are asking for money, but there's a question, can these guys actually be able to achieve what they're trying to do? And then the concept is a tool to share your ideas with the funder and the funder to decide if they will fund. So that's also very key. Then the aspect of how the different people look at it in the marketplace, they're looking at the social impact. How does whatever you're saying going to impact the society? And then from the believers, and many of us are going to believers, is how will the gospel reach a certain community? To what extent are we fulfilling the Great Commission? And I just was wondering to myself, I wonder how many people are using AI to write their proposals, because that would be an interesting thing, because you might end up receiving different proposals from different organizations that read the same thing, other than the name or the other things that come up with AI. I also like the aspect of if you're unsuccessful, you have sent a donor or a partner some information and they didn't respond. It's good to keep the line open, show gratitude, and use that as a learning process. And I thought show gratitude is important because sometimes you don't know what the donor is going through. They could have lost a job, they could be going through transitions. They would want to give, but at that time they're not able to. So just showing that you didn't use them just as money bags. Actually, there's a point where you said always be personal and genuine, authentic, and be interested in the donor. Don't look at them as money bags. And I think sometimes people get the impression that they're just money bags. As soon as the money comes in, their story is forgotten. You don't talk to them until the next time you need money. Then you look for them again. And they kind of get the hang of it that every time it's a certain time of the year, expect to get communication from these guys. They'll be wanting some money, and so they'll be looking for you. So there's a lot of things you said, and I think finally, maybe just to say is that the quotation at the end, you cannot change your destination overnight, but you can change your direction. So thank you very much. Let's give a virtual hand clap to Susan. Thank you very much. We really appreciate all the things that you have shared with us. So now we want to transition to our Q&A session. And thank you for those of you who have put some questions there. We have a question here from Sarah Lee Molody. So this is to Susan. Can you talk about donor fatigue and how do you avoid the tail wagging the dog? I guess that's also related to resource mobilization. So Susan, but if Reverend Kwame, after that, you would want to also answer those questions, it will be welcome. So Susan, how do you talk about donor fatigue and tail wagging the dog?
Thank you. I'll want to make sure that we are clear on what that statement means, but I'll start with the donor fatigue one. And I guess when you talk about donor fatigue is the fact that your givers begin to either demonstrate that they are feeling exhausted with giving or that resources are dwindling, so to speak. And I want to look at it from those perspectives. And one, based on the work we've done, is that one of the things that we've seen is that there's donor fatigue primarily because, and this is what we've heard from different givers and donors, that donor fatigue comes because they receive the same type of information, same type of concepts or ideas. Yeah. And I think this is where I want to go to where Mary Jo is talking about AI, is that even givers are beginning to see ways in which AI is being used. And so we are telling people that it's important to, again, look at what is a need and why you're looking for resources, and then identify who's the best person to engage. Unfortunately, what has happened in the nonprofit space is that we focused on one type of donor or one type of giver, right? And so that has made it very difficult to be able to really find alternatives. And so the donor fatigue is real, and it's because of the challenges, I think, that the context that I think Reverend gave us of what is happening in the space. But we need to think about how do we diversify our giving practices and how do we diversify our engagement with donors? And then understand the interest of the donor. One proposal does not apply to everyone. And this is sometimes where people come back to me and say it's not possible. And I actually challenge that thinking. Resource mobilization is work, and we have to be willing to put in the work. And the work is get to understand your donor, get to understand what their interests are, and engage them. And engage them based on their interest. I think if we do it that way, diversifying who we engage and engaging based on interests, then there's a likelihood that at an institutional level, we will experience less donor fatigue than if we just put out blanket proposals. And be authentic. Tell your story, tell your story, tell your story. People want to feel the human touch. AI is not everything. So I'll just give that as a starting. I know that I give Rev an opportunity to respond, then we can go to the second question.
Thank you. I learned a great deal even from just listening to Njambi's presentation. So many thanks for that. And just to give a quick example of experiencing this, the whole concept of donor fatigue, or people feeling that the request for funding or the request for resources is coming at an inopportune time. I think, generally speaking, and particularly coming from just a faith-based perspective, because we're always encouraging, especially in a church context, you're encouraging your members to trust God, to believe God, that what they're doing is meaningful and it's going to make a great difference, not just in other people's lives, but in terms of ministry as a whole. I remember doing a campaign, a resource mobilization campaign in New Jersey, a small church, interested in raising, I think it was about $1.5 million at the particular time, but they wanted to do it, or they had scheduled to do it in the year 2008. And they had agreed on the time frame, etc., right before they housing crisis. Some of you may remember that there was a serious bubble bursting of the housing crisis in the United States at the time. It was the middle of the campaign for president. Barack Obama, of course, was running against John McCain. And there were decisions that had been made, financial decisions that had been made across the board that were impacting people's retirement funds, impacting their incomes, and people were effectively losing jobs at the time. This church that I was working with decided to move forward with doing their campaign, even as the crisis was now beginning to take effect. And surely, true enough, people in church, some of the members of the church were beginning to lose their jobs, even as they felt that they should move forward on the same. I remember asking the pastor, or he asking what he thought we should do. Should we cancel it? Should we postpone it? And I always back away from answering the question from somebody who is hearing God, because they need to hear God and not me, not the consultant. So I asked him what he felt the Lord was saying. And he said that this was what they needed to do. The money was going to be used for the construction of a children's wing for the church. And the reason they were doing this was because there were new developments in their area, and they knew that they would have a huge impact to the community if they had an effective children's ministry presence. So, of course, going to the church and saying, oh, we need to raise this money at a time when people are losing jobs and the impact of the economy was quite serious, didn't seem to make sense at all. In fact, the pastor's own wife lost her job just as this thing was getting started. But he felt strongly that, no, God had said it's time to move forward. And the interesting thing was that the individuals who were members of the church at the time, because they trusted their pastor, because they knew this was a man of God, he was hearing from God, they decided to make pledges. And a good number of them made pledges. Some of the ones who made pledges, including his wife, got jobs within the next month, within the next 6 weeks. In fact, she got a job in the area of her actual training, which was nursing. She had gone to do something else because she was raising children at home. Now the kids had grown up, but she got back into nursing. And those of you who know how nursing pays in the US, it was actually a much, much better situation. Many other people began to find skills that they had either left dormant, which they could actually use, and began to develop businesses. The church raised the entire amount, the $1.5 million, in the period leading into the housing bubble, through the bubble itself, into 2010. And they were then able, of course, to put up the entire structure. The whole flavor of the church, its membership changed because new people started to come in. People from the neighborhoods and so forth started to come in. So to address this whole donor fatigue issue, which is a real concern and a practical concern, coming from a faith-based situation and going back to what we said from the very beginning, hearing God is critical, and trusting that God wants to reveal himself through the commotion, through the mess, etc. We will never have a perfect set of circumstances for all the monies to come in at the same time. That's not to say that everyone who is in the donor space, like your members, will experience miracles or things will work out for them perfectly. But it will give an opportunity for people to really experience the touch of God in their lives.
Wow. Thank you so much, even for those examples. The practical examples also encourage people here who would be getting worried because of the financial situation or economic situation, especially where we are at. And just still on that, one of the things I've seen maybe is that the people who are partnering many times is a certain age group. I don't know if I'm wrong, but I think it seems to be like the older generation was more ready to give. How are the younger generation giving? Because you talk about sustainability, Susan, and I just made a note of that and just said, people are retiring, people are aging, their capacity to generate income is reducing? Is the next generation also giving so that this thing is sustained? So it's open to any one of you.
If I can quickly jump in, because I find myself in both categories in this sense, in that I'm a baby boomer, and so at this particular point in time, I have less, I guess it's not sustainable income, but less systematic and regular income to say, okay, this is the portion that's going to go. In that sense, it's possible to encourage people who are my generation to say to them, you're not going to take what you've built in terms of wealth to the grave with you. It's not going to be useful to you. So consider making a contribution, a sizable contribution to the generations that follow us. And one of the big things that and I really appreciate Njambi bringing this up, the whole concept of continuity, is that we are responsible to build into the next generation. Our discipleship is not effective. In fact, this is true from scripture itself. We are not effective in our disciple making until the fourth generation. So we're not successful in our ministry until our great grandchildren are doing ministry at an even better scale than we are. The secondary group, which is the millennials and Gen Zs, they may have less wealth, so to speak, in terms of assets and so forth to draw from. But if one appeals to their sense of support for purpose, for causes, we're much more likely to get support from them. Millennials buy a huge percentage, and they are the main, the largest percentage of the workforce anywhere in the world today. Are millennials are really interested in supporting things that make a difference in other people's lives. So if it's a good cause, if it's a practical mission, they want to give towards that. So if our church, for example, makes an appeal not just for, let's say, a new building, and not articulate exactly what that space is going to accomplish in the long run, they're less likely to give towards church. That's not to say that they won't tithe or they won't give an offering, but they'll give less than what my generation has been doing over time, because we've been taught to tithe, we've been taught to give offerings. As for Gen Zs, they want to know that they want to know who's using the money and for what. So if we can, to support what Susan was saying earlier on, if we can support accountability and show trustworthiness, we're more likely to build a sense of support from Gen Zs. But at the same time, it is the responsibility of us as boomers to train, to disciple, to teach those who are coming behind us the significance of giving and the support that the difference they can make in supporting various options. That's been my experience.
Thank you very much. We lost you briefly. I think you must have been talking about the Gen X's. What is the story of the Gen X's? I don't think we heard about that.
Oh, sorry. No, let me give Susan a chance to contribute.
Okay. Susan?
No, I was looking forward to hearing the Gen X's, because I want to talk about the Gen Alphas.
Yes.
Because I am raising Gen Alphas. And one of the things that I have learned is I think we need to think about resource mobilization as a culture.
Yes.
And we need to start with the generation now. It is those things of helping this generation understand, why is giving important? Why do we give? We don't just give because it's an obligation. We are giving because we have been commanded to do the Great Commission, and it's to dominate the world. As Christians, we should not fear to mention it, because that is what we are here to do. But who's going to do that domination? I have done my time, right? It's the next generation. How am I preparing the next generation? I should not wait until the next generation is earning an income. We should actually begin the process from now, when they have a basic understanding of giving. And I say we need to take advantage of the whole conversation. We start having the conversation of Jesus' money. that is a time to start doing it. Because it begins to inculcate that culture within our children. And with time, what happens is they begin to recognize its importance. They begin to appreciate the reason why. Because as I said, we have to start with the why. Because that helps to be able to engage. But I think we also need to think about how are we engaging the different generations. We need to appreciate that each generation is facing different challenges in the world they live in, and they are growing in a different world. And so we need to appreciate, we need to adapt. And that's why I talked about adaptability culture, adaptability capability. I like using the example of my project associate is a Gen Z. And she normally tells me of the things I need to do and I'm facilitating, and I go like, I shrink because I'm like, as a Gen X, I'm like, that does not work. But when I actually apply it to her group of people, I can see their eyes enlighten. I can see the interest become. And so it's that how are we building a team that is multi-generational to be able to appreciate the different approaches?
Okay.
Right? It's very critical.
Wow. Multi-generational team to help you be able to reach out to your funders or to your partners and to be able to get results across the generations. Otherwise, you'll find yourselves with a gap. When one generation stops, then the next generation is not able to pick up the baton. Thank you very much for that. So we have another question. Please talk about local fundraising efforts that more organizations could explore. Who wants to take that one? I think, Reverend Rubadiri, you can take that. And also tell us, you mentioned something about getting the wealthy to give. So as you're talking about this, just also tell us how we can get the wealthy to part with some of their riches.
Yes. and thankfully, much of my experience, of course, is from working with wealthy people who go to church, which is useful. One of the things that you'll notice from wealthy people is that they don't want to be taken advantage of. They don't want to be seen as assumed to have the money, therefore they will give. Like everybody else in church, regardless of what your economic status might be, you want to know why. And going back to the same thought that Susan raised earlier, you want to know why this is important. And you want to know that I'm not being approached or asked specifically because I have money or I have wealth. I want to know why it is that you have, why it is that I should make a generous contribution towards this particular effort. One of my friends who used to be a consultant I worked with in a team in the US used to take pleasure in guilting wealthy people into giving, which I think is a terrible mistake, because you have to keep coming back to them, and you don't want them to feel that the only reason that you accept them or welcome them in church is because they have money, and therefore they will be considered the money bags. The best approach is to approach them as you would any other individual. And in some cases, it may mean having a sit down, a one-on-one sit down, and saying that you're in a position to make a huge difference because of the wealth that God has entrusted to you. I'm not here to tell you how to use the wealth that God has given to you. I'm just simply asking you to do what everyone else in church is doing, which is ask God and to pray and to see where your contribution can make a meaningful difference. Never mentioning any figures or any numbers, etc. They know the target. They know the figures that we're looking at, and leave it up to God to speak to them. One of the things that we used to do, and I still do for consulting for churches here, is to do a focus group, a series of questions for the focus group, which is fairly representative of the leadership of the group, of the church, and the membership. We try to say, okay, this is a profile of who we have. in our church. The older people, the Gen Xers, the millennials, they should all be part of this particular group. And we asked them 5 questions. The first question is, do you believe that this is an important project for the church? Nobody's a yes or no answer. Yes. Have you prayed about? Oh no. The second question is, how much do you believe that God wants you to give towards this? And they can put down a figure. The third question is, what do you think the largest amount pledged or given to this particular campaign will be? And they put that figure down. And then the fourth question is, are you prepared to, if you were to pray further about the gift that you want to give, what gift would it be? So it should be higher than, generally should be higher than the gift, the number you put in number 2. The last question is always an interesting one. Does the number you have put down now constitute a sacrifice on your part? And in most cases, people think back to themselves and say, okay, I really need to reconsider what I'm giving or what I'm doing. Now, for the people who are in the millions, the millionaires, the even billionaires who come to the churches, especially in the US, the fifth question, the question of sacrifice, would be the main, would either be a deal breaker or it would be a game changer for them, because then they would realize that this is really about me dealing with God and not necessarily being part of the number that that the church is seeking to raise. For partners, let's say when we're dealing with alumni, for colleges and academic institutions that are trying to raise money for a program or for a building or whatever it might be, the questions would be similar, but the focus would be, does this number or whatever commitment you're willing to make constitute your willingness to support the next generation of leaders or the next group of people who will come out of this institution of higher learning, whether it's a theological school, and most of the ones I've worked with are theological schools. And then people start thinking about, am I looking at this from the point of view of just the project and the outcome, or am I really thinking generationally about the kind of leaders that we're raising in this institution and what they will offer in terms of ministry in the future?
Wow, thank you. That's very helpful. Amen. Especially some people might not be having it's easy to do in a congregation, you already have a set group, but for those other people who have different people, we were told about organizing like a dinner or an activity to appreciate them. Yes. That's a good place to now put this kind of questionnaire through maybe a partner event or something like that, so that you just share that so that they're filling it in, but without pressure, without being told this is the figure we are looking for, but these are the needs.
Yes.
Thank you very much for that. It really points that out very well. And actually, I think also earlier on somebody had mentioned, it's Susan actually mentioned about involving the people with what you're doing. Sometimes being a part of that helps you. I once went to Marral for the launch of the Samburu Bible, and that now being on the ground and just seeing what these guys are doing and what that money does,
yes,
speaks volumes. So that's another way of getting people, just organize this thing and don't just go, but just go with one or some of the people and take them. And Susan also mentioned about the videos. So that is very, very, also that's also important. Give us reports of what you have been doing, what has been achieved. That should be able to help people be able to raise funds. So we come to the last question that's here. Kindly share faith-based funding platforms you can explore for grants and collaboration. Susan, can you take us through that? Faith-based funding platforms you can explore for grants and collaboration.
I could try, but before that, I wanted to just add something on the
on
the
local
other one,
fundraising.
Yes. Yeah, it's just to share that it was in 2018, and there was a report that came out and talked about the fact that individual giving is very high in Kenya. And I'm talking about the Kenyan context. And I want to use the Kenyan context as an opportunity for us to really explore the local giving. And the thing that came out very interestingly was that people were not looking at local giving because they were looking at large amounts of money. And not looking at the fact that there's someone who's willing to give you 1,000 shillings continuously every week. And that has better impact than the person who's willing to give you 100,000 once.
Exactly.
And for me, I challenge the thought of wealth and who is wealthy. Because we have a worldly construction of who is wealthy. And as Christians, we need to be careful that we don't fall into that trap. Is that if we believe as Christians that then we have been called to create wealth or be able to just advance the work that we do, then we need to recognize that everyone amongst us is actually a carrier of wealth. And how then do we ensure that this person who's giving me 10 shillings and this person who's giving me 10,000 shillings is recognized as wealthy? That is what helps us to grow givers. And that's why I say when you're cultivating your givers, when you're doing your engagement with givers, please do not treat the person giving 2 shillings any different from the person giving 10,000.
Fantastic.
And we go back, and it's back to even the biblical concept. And if you remember, the woman who gave with all her heart her last 2 coins and cried before God. Those are the genuine givers. Those are the wealthy givers. Those are the people we should be pursuing. And for me, that's what I will ask us to do. Think about the space you're in, the context you're in, but don't look at it from a scarcity mentality. Look at it from the perspective of there's wealth in this space. How do we capitalize and use the potential here to grow that wealth? Yeah.
Wow.
Can I just add quickly to that? Because there's actually data to support what Susan has just said. They call the Charities Aid Foundation. Every year they produce a report. Last year they produced a report, and it showed that charitable giving, and this is giving to individuals, even family members. I mean, we give when people ask us for medical support and things of that nature. Small amounts. Was greatest. The continent that gave the most in that way was Africa.
Imagine.
And the US was like number 5. So you think, the wealthiest nations are the ones that would give the most. But it precisely to Susan's point that it was these small amounts that are given consistently and cases sacrificially by people to them, members of their family, members of their community, etc. But that has happened so consistently in Africa over the last decades that people forget that those are the little numbers that make the huge difference over time. That doesn't mean that we don't hold the feet of the very rich and the very wealthy to the fire. We challenge them to give in the same way as sacrificially as their as the people who work for them are doing. But there's this general culture which has been documented and the data proves it that this commitment to giving generously, giving and supporting in small amounts over time makes us perhaps one of the wealthiest continents on the planet. Amen.
Yes, we are. We are very, very blessed, and we have so many resources. But I think sometimes people don't get to know where the resources are required. But just to the donors also, when you have your appreciation, please also remember these small quote unquote donors, because sometimes you have the appreciation for these big guys, but you forget those guys who actually are filling in the biggest gap, and you don't want to leave them out. You have no idea who's growing from being a small-time giver, and in our view today, to being the person who is the biggest giver in a short while.
Amen.
Thank you. So now there was a question, and this one very brief because we're running out of time. Faith-based funding platforms.
Well, the one that I can say for sure is it's called Donor Box, and it's a platform where you can be able to identify and access donors. And also it's a place where you can be able to share your story, but they also have resources that can help you to track how much you're getting, where that is coming from, and those kind of things. So that's one. I know they are, I wouldn't say they are faith-based, but there are other funding platforms that exist. But one thing I'll caution us to check is to check what they will cost us, right? So some of the platforms actually charge you for carrying your story and enabling you to raise resources. And sometimes people don't see that. Some of them will charge you as little as 5%. Others will charge you exorbitantly to 30% of what you receive. So please be careful in some of those spaces. I don't want to name them here, but I want you to be careful to check what then do they charge for that, right? Because that's very critical. Again, who are you targeting as your givers? I think that's also very important. So it's not in fact enough to talk about platforms, but also think about the spaces that then you want to be able to engage your givers. Because again, if you're in the African space, it's better to use a platform that's within Africa as opposed to using a platform that's abroad that then links back to Africa, and sometimes is a challenge. So it's important for you to think about some of those aspects. Yeah, I think I just want to highlight those key ones. And then there's one question we didn't respond to about the wagging tail. I'll come to that after.
Yes. And your time is running out, so you better
Yes.
put in the wagging tail now because we want
Okay, let me put it
to
in for
end.
the wagging tail.
Yes.
And I want to use it using a story. So I worked with an organization where we focused on community development. And one of the things we sought out is that we really wanted to see how do we maximize corporate giving. And we decided we wanted to target betting companies. Betting companies are expected to give 2% of their money to charity. And so we thought it would be good to actually engage with them. But when we sat and looked at our values and the values of the betting companies, we realized that we're in problems. Because betting companies, one of the challenges they have is that they actually erode family values. We were an organization that's promoting family values. And as much as the betting companies were making a lot of money, this is a time when the betting companies had just come into the market and they were soaring. We really had to sit with the board, and we had conversations with the board as a leadership. And we actually decided that we were not going to use that approach of engaging betting companies. Now, it's not like we had a lot of money in our hands. It's not like we were okay. We were struggling, but we made that difficult choice. What am I saying to the person who has asked the question? Molodi, if you want to avoid the tail wagging, then you have to determine what are your fundraising, what are your values as an organization, especially as a faith-based organization. What is it that you will use as your fundraising principles? Because that will be very critical before you engage a partner. Once you have an understanding of that, then you avoid the spaces of the tail wagging. As an organization, if we hadn't been very clear about our fundraising principles, then it would have been very difficult for us because we would have engaged with those betting companies. And after that, we would have had a lot to explain on how we are devaluing ourselves as an organization, but also disrespecting the communities we were serving.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I think that was very clear how we need to go about looking for who's going to support us. There's also the question on focus group, and it has been answered there. Thank you, Reverend Rubajiri, for doing that. So at this point, we want to close our Q&A session. And I want to ask our speakers, starting with Susan, that, starting with Susan, what is your parting shot? And give it in connection to AFCA.
For me, it's let's have a mind full of plenty. There's plenty in this world. There's plenty for us to go out for. Resources are available for our work. It is what values are we carrying as we go to look for this work, but also how are we equipping ourselves to know where to get these resources? And this is where I think AFCA comes in. This is an amazing webinar. Let's continue doing this. Let's continue looking at practical ways of being able to support us to not only have knowledge, but the skills to be able to do it, but more so, let's document the successes and the learnings that we are picking from these processes, because that is how we're going to grow and have dominance in the world. Thank you, and God bless all of you.
Yes, thank you. Documenting is important. Reverend Rubadiri, the same question. What is your parting shot? And especially in reference to AFCA.
Thank you so much. I must say that I've really enjoyed the entire discussion. It's been such a pleasure to hear from Susan, and certainly the questions as well. And thanks for your very able moderation, Mary Jo, as well. My parting shot would be this, that we should not, as resource mobilizers or those engaged in resource mobilization, be thinking of it as an event or as a one-time function. I think at the end of the day, because we said at the very beginning, resource mobilization and all the things we stand for as our standards here at APCA are to do with discipling organizations, discipling the people of God going forward. So I would rather see us as working towards the building of a culture of generosity, which would begin with our being absolutely clear what our values are, to repeat what Susan said, and being absolutely clear what God has called us to do. And having done that, recognizing that we have a responsibility to the next generation. We have a responsibility not only to provide them with the resources they need to do ministry or to represent the Lord, but also a responsibility to teach them that they must also have input in the generations that follow them. I think if we build that culture, it'll be much easier to find the resources, find the money, find the goods and the skills that we need for any project that God calls us to do. So let's work on a culture of generosity over and above.
Thank you very much. A culture of generosity, and remembering who that God is a giver, and He's actually passing over to us what we need to do. And for us to fulfill our mandate, we need to be able to know that we need to give. And maybe people are waiting for the opportunity to give, they just don't know where. So I think our work is cut out as funders. We need to know how we will go back and be able to change what we've been doing and get better responses. So thank you very much, our facilitators. We truly appreciate your sharing and taking time to equip us. So I want to hand over to Pauline Kimani. She will be taking us through a vote of thanks and also a poll. So there's a poll we talked about from the beginning, and Pauline will be taking us through that after a vote of thanks. So Pauline Kimani.
All right. Thank you so much. Our facilitators and also the moderator, you have done exemplary well. And we really want to thank God for you and for allowing God to use you, as His tool today to equip us. I am so enlightened. I have written notes. I have written lots and lots of notes. And I'm sure that even AFCA will benefit from this particular one, even if we are the ones that assess and accredit on this standard. So thank you very much for being so useful to us and in the body of Christ. We really do appreciate. And we have received a lot of thanks, even as we went on with the conversations. I could see our participants really thanking the moderator and the facilitators for being so useful to us and giving freely that which God has given them. I think I really agree with you, and whatever we have done today also agrees with our standard number 7, which is resource mobilization, what we were talking about. And our word, our verse that we align with in AFCA is Psalms 24 and verse 1, which says that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell there. And both our facilitators have alluded and even, spoke to us about all of us have received, we have been given, we belong to the Lord, and everything that we have belongs to the Lord. Everyone has something to give, and therefore the Lord, where we have been called to do the work, the Lord will provide for it. I think that is acknowledging that all the resources are providence from God, and therefore the work can be done. This standard really talks about sustainability, and we believe that our members who have participated today have seen how then the organization can, all the work that they are doing can be able to go beyond the founders. Yeah, casting the vision so clearly and being able to pass it to the next generation, including the Gen Alphas and the ones who are coming after that. We now know we have the tools, and we can always refer back to our notes and even come back to AFCA. We have a resource center where you can be able to listen back to this webinar that has been very, very impactful to us. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Our members, our prospective members are here. Those who have never interacted with AFCA are also here. We invited them. And you can see that the work that is ongoing. AFCA is here to sharpen the body of Christ so that we can be able to do the work that God has given each one of us, each and every institution. So God bless you so much. So without further ado, I would want to go to the poll. And this is where now we get feedback from our participants to hear from you what it is that you have gained from this webinar. So I'll invite the team, Peter and Annette, to do that for us. So just taking a few seconds and give us the feedback so that you can be able to hear what your take home was, how you're going to implement or to apply that which you have gotten today. And at the same time, it becomes a place of, we have been told to take record of what we are doing. So we'll also be able to take record of this particular sharpening session and come back to you with information that is data driven. So go ahead and fill in the poll. Then from there, I'll be calling the one who is giving us a benediction so that we can release you. But we really want to thank you for your patience. Almost 2.5 hours is not short time, but you have been very, very patient with us. So everyone who have come from all over Africa, we really want to thank you and to pray that the Lord sustain you as a person and also at the institution where he has called you to work. So God bless you, even as you do this.
Okay, let's pray. Father, thank you so much for the great things that you're doing, that as a community we can come together and learn about how vast and how good and how graceful you are to all of us. We thank you for our panelists. We thank you for the speakers. We thank you for AFCA and all that we've been able to learn, people from all sorts of countries and backgrounds, that we can gather around you this evening. And so as we go to our other tasks, Lord, we pray that you bless these teams beyond their sacrifices, that you'd also bless all of us as we go back to do that which we need to be and as we seek to implement. This we pray with thanksgiving in Jesus' name. Amen.